Good evening. My name is Linda Biella, and as Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Appleton, in joint sponsorship with the Appleton branch of the American Association of University Women, I'd like to welcome you to this virtual webinar. Welcome also to those who are joining us on Facebook. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Appleton League's website. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots political organization established in 1920 that advocates for informed and active participation in government. For over a century, the League's primary mission has been to empower voters and defend democracy. Our topic tonight is gerrymandering. It does the exact opposite. It disempowers voters and undermines democracy. This is why the League of Women Voters has designated April 29th as a National People-Powered Day of Action to focus attention on the all-important issue of redistricting. Next slide, please. We are meeting on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. Today, I am speaking to you from the homelands of the Menominee Nation. In addition to the Menominee Nation, there are 10 more federally recognized Native American sovereign nations in Wisconsin, as well as the brother town, which is not yet recognized. By acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional land of these sovereign nations, we honor with gratitude all who have stewarded the land and water throughout the generations and for generations to come. Next slide, please. The process of redistricting will take place this year as it does every 10 years following the census. It is when we reapportion our voting districts for Congress and the state legislature according to the new population numbers. This is intended to ensure that every citizen has equal representation according to the principle of one person, one vote. Next slide. But because of gerrymandering, we no longer have equal representation. And in Wisconsin, it often feels as if we have no representation due to the extreme gerrymandering that was done here in 2011. Next slide. I hope you have all had an opportunity to view the film, Can You Hear Us Now? This documentary personalizes the effects of gerrymandering in Wisconsin by following two unsuccessful candidates for the Wisconsin Assembly in their 2018 campaigns. It also features grassroots activists who are fighting for fair legislative maps in 2021. If you haven't yet had a chance to view the film, it is still accessible through 11 p.m. this evening. At this time, I would like to introduce Susan Peters and Jim Cricky, the filmmakers of Can You Hear Us Now? Susan and Jim, first of all, I'd like to thank you for making this compelling documentary. Redistricting and gerrymandering are complex and hard to explain, but your documentary makes this topic understandable and real through the personal stories you tell in the film. Can you tell us how you went about deciding the format of this film? How did you find the people you followed during their campaigns? And why did you choose them as film subjects?
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for having this event and having us tonight. The process of making this film was very organic. We did our research, but we were figuring it out week to week as we went along. We knew that we didn't want to do a strictly interview talking heads based documentary. We wanted to get to know people and tell their stories. So we knew about Jennifer Estrada from a previous film that we made, but we didn't really know her well. We found out she was running for office in Manitowoc, which was about an hour east of where we were in Fond du Lac. And after we met her, we immediately were interested in filming with her. She has a great community of people and just a lot going on every single day, and just a different kind of candidate. Sheila Plotkin, we found out about her from an interview that she did with the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. And Sheila was the first person that we filmed, and her stories really inspired us, and we knew we would come back again and film with her, and we did. We met Rebecca Clark, the other candidate who was running for assembly, when Jenny was at an event in Sheboygan, and Rebecca was there giving a talk. And she had a lot of charisma, and she was very funny and smart, and she also happened to live in a very gerrymandered district, so that kind of worked out for us. And that was the process of this, you know, a little random, but researched as well.
Yeah, they were very interesting people. What kinds of experiences did you have with the people you followed? And were there people that you hoped to include in the film who were not willing to be interviewed?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think one of the biggest experiences that we've talked about was just being in the middle of really grassroots campaigns. Jim in particular, but we both spent a lot of time with Jenny and Rebecca's crews. And these were really community efforts. They weren't distracted by national politics. They were really focused on their districts and on Wisconsin, and just the amount of volunteer hours that went into their campaigns was pretty unbelievable and personally really inspiring. But getting Jenny and Rebecca's opponents on film was tough, just because they weren't very visible. And I think that's part of the problem, that, you know, something that happens in a district when you know you're going to win, you just need to keep your head down and avoid controversy during an election. So getting a debate with Paul Tittle took a lot of work from Jenny's team, including putting up billboards saying, "Why won't you debate me?" And Rebecca never got a debate with her opponent, Terry Katzma. So at some point, we just decided not to force them into the film, but to kind of reflect the same lack of presence that the people we were talking to felt. They just weren't present most of the time. I'd also say that it's hard to film during an election. People don't want to get caught on camera at an awkward moment, which is understandable. So we spent a lot of time talking our way into places, and Jim got kicked out of a couple places, but we really got to spend time with the people we thought were, you know, most important for telling the story.
Yeah, they were. I'm sure there were a lot of scenes or footage in your film that you had to eliminate. Can you tell us about some specific interviews or scenes that you wish could have been included?
Yeah, there were many. We, on the second or third day of filming with Jennifer Estrada, she's voting in the primary, and she's a candidate, and it turns out that she is not on the voter rolls, and she couldn't vote. She couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. There wasn't really a reason for it. She hadn't moved in a long time, but we could not fit it into the film because that part of her story is kind of linear. So it would have had to been in the very beginning of the movie, and sounds like it should be at the beginning of a movie, but we couldn't make it work. There was just too much to introduce. And there were a lot of other stories. We drove about 15,000 miles in the 3 or 4 months of filming, filmed with a lot of people who didn't make it into the film. A few storylines about community organizing up in Rhinelander, and also a huge story down in Racine that kind of deserved its own film. Both interesting stories, great people, but there was just too many storylines in the film. So we had to cut things to focus really just on these few issues. And I think ultimately it's a better film because of that, you know.
Well, how do you hope this film can be used, and what do you hope it can accomplish?
Well, this is what we hope for, having conversations like this. I think figuring out what's happening in state legislatures around the country is really tough right now. It's hard to follow. It's not well reported on. a lot of people don't understand what gerrymandering is still. So we hope the film will give more personal context for the work of, people like the people on this call are doing for voter rights. And we're also making it available for schools and libraries, and we have, materials to go with it. So we're hoping to have more programming to help people talk about democracy and about kind of state legislation and thinking about their states and not just getting distracted with national issues.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for making this film. Once again, it is, as I said, it really personalizes what gerrymandering does and how it affects real people. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Sheila Plotkin, who was interviewed in the film when she explained her work, showing the constituent context to the legislator and how it illustrated that our state representatives really don't represent us. Sheila tells me that in addition to being the founder of the website We the Irrelevant, she is a retired teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing and a proud member of the Raging Grannies of Madison, as well as a maker of good trouble. Sheila, please tell us about your work. And can we go to the next slide, please?
She's muted.
Sheila, you're muted.
Sheila, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Senior moment. So let me begin again. I want to thank Linda and especially Linda for inviting me, but also for her limitless patience trying to get my slides organized. She was wonderful, which is why I felt like I know her already. I want to use my time to tell you about the origins of We the Irrelevant, followed by data from the Fox Valley districts, and finally, what I believe my data means. In the fall of 2015, the Republican majority promulgated bills intended to fundamentally change Wisconsin's electoral landscape. The bills were given only one public hearing in Madison, and all passed within a few weeks. And I was struck by the speed. I wanted to know if Wisconsinites were pushing for these significant changes, and I realized I could use our open records law to find out. So I sent an open records request to each of the 19 Republican state senators, asking for citizen correspondence related to the dismantling of the Government Accountability Board. I gave each of them a specific time frame within which to search, and then I waited to see what would happen next. What you see on this graphic are 3 of the senators whose results caught my attention. As you look at this graphic, I want to share this, and if you've watched the film, you've heard me say it. I heard a Wisconsin legislator remark many years ago that if he received 10 phone calls about a particular bill, he knew he'd better pay attention. I ask you to remember what he said. I'm going to refer to it again. What you see here, let me begin with Senator Markline's records. They were among the first I reviewed. He received an average of 5 contacts per day. Of those, 98% were opposed to the proposed bill. Senator LeMahieu did better than that, averaging 7.4 contacts per day, 83% of which were opposed. But Senator Moulton won the prize. He averaged 12 contacts per day, and 94% were opposed. All 3 of these senators voted to dismantle the GAB. The disconnect between what citizens were saying and what these legislators were doing brought the remark of that dinosaur legislator back to me with considerable impact. I realized that I'd stumbled on something important. In a representative democracy, the influence of citizens on their elected officials is foundational. When that influence no longer exists, the people have a right to know it. And my belief in that right was the impetus for We the Irrelevant. Next slide, please. In the ensuing 4 years, I sent more open records requests, some of them covering more than one bill. Here you'll see the issues and notes regarding bill passage. Nearly all of the proposed bills passed in one form or another. I'll return to this slide shortly. Next slide, please. In advance of the 2020 election, I decided to summarize my data by district and make those individual summaries publicly available. Here's the summary for Fox Valley's districts: Senate districts 2 and 19, and Assembly districts 4, 5, and 6, and 55, 56, and 57. The key information here is the percentage of contacts in opposition and how the legislator voted on the 19 issues I queried. Note that the percentages range from 74 to 100% opposed. There's one on the bottom that you can't see. And that was Governor Evers. I've lost my video. Sorry. That was Governor Evers. Never mind, I'm going to skip that now if you don't mind. Except for Representative Stuck here in the Fox Valley, each of these legislators ignored the voices in opposition and voted yes the majority of the time. Next slide, please. What does this data mean? I believe it documents that we the people, formerly able to influence both legislators and the bills they proposed, have become we the irrelevant. What's the difference between my long gone legislator, you remember his 10 phone calls, and those currently in power? In one word, competition. He knew he had to pay attention, because if he didn't, he could lose his seat to someone who would. These legislators don't worry about that. Next slide, please. They can ignore the voices of hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites. Why? Because they know that opposition candidates cannot overcome the stifling effect of their 2011 gerrymander. I'll conclude with this. We must have fair maps. Over the next 10 years, fair maps will give opposition candidates a leveled playing field. When the makeup of our state legislature accurately reflects the popular vote, then we the irrelevant can go back to being we the people. Thank you. Linda? Oh, no.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. There was for some reason, I wasn't able to unmute my audio. Sheila, this is a story that needs to be shouted from the hilltops all over the state. Thank you for your work. This is really an incredible amount of evidence that you have put forth. So, it's very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Penny Bernard Shaber, formerly representative from the 57th Assembly District in the Wisconsin Legislature from Appleton. Could we go to the next slide, please? On this slide, you can see a comparison of the 57th district prior to and after the redistricting in 2011. Penny, could you tell us about your experience in the assembly in 2011 when the current gerrymandered maps were created? How did your district change, and what impact did those changes have on voting patterns? I think
There, I think I got it. Okay. So yes, I was representing the 57th Assembly District when redistricting occurred. And the process that was used was very secretive and was not transparent at all. Majority party hired a private law firm to do the redistricting. No Democrat was asked to be involved, and the Republican legislators signed secrecy agreements in order to view their new districts. They couldn't talk about them to the public or to their constituents. When the maps came up for a vote, they were not available for public viewing or for viewing by all of the legislators. The bill to do this redistricting was introduced on July 11th of 2011. A hearing was held on July 13th, followed by a executive committee vote on July 15th, and a vote in the Assembly on July 20th. And then the Senate concurred on July 21st. So in the course of 10 days, Wisconsin became the worst possible gerrymandered state in our country. It was quite the process. Next slide. Yeah. So when I was initially elected to the 57th Assembly District, the district was mostly the city of Appleton that was found inside of 41 and 441. So it would have been most of the city, okay? I had a few wards in Little Chute. It had been very much a Republican district for a long time. It had changed and become very competitive. I ran in 2006 and lost, and stood up and ran again in 2008 and was able to be successful because it was an open seat at that time. The incumbent had decided to retire. So when I ran, and when 2011 happened, I had two very different districts. In 2006 and 8, it was the city of Appleton. In 2011, the district became half of the city of Appleton and all of the city of Menasha and part of Fox Crossings, or what was then the town of Menasha. So when I went from one city basically to represent in the legislature to two cities and a town, one county initially to two counties, and it really changed the way the city was represented in our legislature. So it was a tremendous change. It gave me a very safe seat because apparently it was considered to be a very democratic area, the southern half of Appleton and the city of Menasha, considered to be very safe. But I remember telling Representative Voss that I really didn't need his help to run a good election and to run a good campaign, and that I could be successful without being given a safe seat. Next. So the redistricting process prior to 2011 was a very different kind of process. In the 3 decades prior to 2011, there was a split government, which meant that nobody in the legislature could make maps pass without the governor approving of them. And then because the governor had veto power, the governor could veto the maps, and then they went to the court. So in 1981, Wisconsin had a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature. In 1991, Wisconsin had a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature again, split government. In 2001, Wisconsin had a Republican governor, a Democratic Senate, and a Republican assembly. So those 3 decades, we had split government and nobody could agree. The governor vetoed the bills that came forward and the courts made the final decision and the legislature had to approve the maps the court drew. So the process was very different because of the divided government that we had. All right, we can go to the next slide if there's another one. Okay, whoops, go back because I'm not the People's Maps Commission. And what happens now, because the redistricting process allows the maps to be approved by the legislature and the governor of one party, which is what happened in 2011, then that party can design the districts to give them partisan control and partisan power until the next census. In other words, gerrymandering has become the dominant form of redistricting in Wisconsin. This leads to unbalanced election results where one vote and one person, the opportunity for that person's vote to count equally to another does not occur. And this leads to dominance of one party over all other things, as we see happening here in Wisconsin. And it leads to complete gridlock that we see happening in our federal government. And so I truly believe that a fair maps process is absolutely necessary for us to get anything done, both here in Wisconsin and at our federal government. So thanks very much for letting me tell you what happened in my district.
Yeah, and if you could just talk a little bit about how the redistricting process in 2011 was from the top down rather than the bottom up, as it has previously or historically been done, starting with municipalities and counties.
Right. And during the whole process of redistricting, the state started the process first in 2011. And they basically ignored the lines that the counties and the cities were drawing. This was against the law at the time. So they actually had to change the law and say, oh, we, the state, can go first and we don't have to pay any attention to the local lines. And that's what has created some really, really difficult districts in Wisconsin and has made it more complex for the municipalities and more expensive for the municipalities. Excuse me. So it's been a tough time here in Wisconsin because our municipalities have lost their voice, as well as me losing my voice as a voter.
Yeah.
So, right.
Thank you very much for sharing these insights with us, Penny, and thank you for your service also in the Wisconsin legislature. These days, Penny is chair of the Fair Maps team here in the 8th Congressional District. I'm a member of that team, as well as our next speaker, Anthony Phillips. So could we have the next slide, please? Anthony was appointed to represent the 8th Congressional District on the People's Maps Commission. This commission is comprised of bipartisan citizen representatives from each of Wisconsin's 8 congressional districts, plus one chairperson. It was created by Governor Evers to gather testimony from Wisconsin citizens through public hearings in each congressional district, and then use that information to develop nonpartisan district maps. Tony, I'd like you to talk about your experience with the People's Maps Commission. Can you cite some examples of the testimony that you've heard?
Sure. Can I just go through the slides and we'll get to that, Linda?
Sure, just go right ahead.
So I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Linda, and all the organizers. What a great event. And I just appreciate the opportunity to summarize what the People's Maps Commission is trying to do to deliver on the hope of offering fair maps to the legislature. So I want to push the website of wisconsin.gov/peoplesmaps. That's going to be our historical record for our work, for the maps, for the thousands of public comments we've received, for all of your submissions. So please get used to seeing that. We've held 8 hearings, 1 in each congressional district, starting last October. We've heard from many experts from Wisconsin across the country in different areas of redistricting. And as I said, both at the public hearings and by submissions, we've had over 1,000 comments representing 65 of our counties, 245 of our municipalities. And up to this point, we've had 30+ hours of hearings and meetings on this issue. So let's go to the next slide. And to answer your question, Linda, you know, what are we commonly hearing is exactly what all of you are already saying and feeling. You know, about a year ago, there was still people trying to say, well, it's not gerrymandered. Well, it is. We all knew that. But, you know, we kept hearing in our hearings about the scientific literature that proves it. The courts agree, but they won't give us a solution. And then very importantly, we heard over and over in the hearings about examples of the splitting, as Penny talks about, of the counties and cities, which dilutes the power of the counties and cities and the votes locally. We heard specifically about Dunn County being split 4 times, St. Croix, Marathon, Walworth. Cities that I've listed there, Appleton in this area, Grand Chute used to be part of 1 assembly district. Now it's 3 assembly districts. And then just to document, this is a topic nationwide. Wisconsin is a topic of academics nationwide, including Professor Chin at the University of Michigan, who quantitated how severely the counties and cities were split in 2011. Why? For partisan benefit. So what is the upshot? Well, like we've said, and what the movie talked about, politicians don't respond as much as they used to. They don't need to because they're in safe districts. Very importantly, another effect is who wins legislative seats is not determined in November, it's determined in August. Because you have to win the August primary voters, there tends to be less of them. They tend to be more extreme. The politicians become more extreme. It exacerbates hyperpartisanship, extremism, another very bad effect. So let's go to the next slide. So the commitment of the People's Map Commission is to offer for all of you and to the legislature maps that are completely nonpartisan, neutral, and we think by doing so, it will return responsiveness to the elections themselves, but also it will allow or cause the representatives to need to be more responsive. We're working with Professor Duchin and her group at Tufts University, and I'm sure most of you are hearing about District R, the goal of which is to put the tools of redistricting in the hands of the public. Why don't we go to the next slide? So here I list the criteria, which are also listed on the website. And there's certain things that the commission or anybody drawing maps has to follow, including Voting Rights Act, nesting 3 assembly districts in each Senate district. Then our first priorities will be to make our maps contiguous, compact, and preserve cities and counties. Very definitely, that's our goal. Even by doing that, it will return responsiveness to the election. Second priority is to use the communities of interest maps that all of you are drawing to influence where we do have to make the splits. Even Dr. Chen's research said that 45 counties do need to be split. So we have to make splits somewhere. The communities of interest, at the end of that, Professor Duchin will create a heat map of, okay, where was the common community of interest? Where did people show their COIs? We'll use that information to influence where we do need to make splits. We will pay attention, group 3, to population deviation. There are certain legal requirements there that we have to pay attention to. We will stretch that as we can to fulfill higher priority. And finally, we are not using any voter preference data to draw the maps we're going to offer. We're not using any voter preference data. But once we have created many, many maps, and we can create hundreds that may adhere to the above criteria, then we'll take a look at those maps. We will then turn on the election data from the last 5 years of presidential elections, Senate elections. And we'll use the voting totals there to break down and to decide which of the maps tend to create proportionality, meaning which of the maps tend to lean toward the 50-50 split that we all know Wisconsin is. That's called partisan fairness. So let's go to the next slide. So again, a big topic for all of you advocate is the communities of interest. Through that, Professor Duchin wants to learn how people see themselves within groups and within the larger communities, enhancing democratic engagement. As I said, we'll use that to influence where we split. If you haven't already, you can apply to train on District R. I put the website here. And the goal is to have thousands of these maps as we get into June. Okay. Next slide. All right, and where are we at? We had another meeting last night with Professor Duchin to try to, how we're going to go forward. The commission expressed some concern of, we don't know what we're doing. We're not expert map drawers. So it's going to be sort of a hybrid. Next week, we're having a public train the commissioners event where the commissioners are going to sit down with Professor Duchin and map out potential congressional districts using the recent data that came out. At the same time, Professor Duchin is going to give to us computer-generated assembly maps, a number of them, so that we can start getting used to looking at those, making decisions about the criteria, et cetera. Along the way, throughout this process over the next months, we'll be asking for public comments, very transparent process. In mid-August, the census numbers should come out, more public comments on the final maps that we draw at that time. And then, we're going to try to submit our maps to the legislature about the same time they're probably coming up with their own maps in September, October. And again, I would just make a push again on the website where our permanent record will be. So Linda, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Thanks, Tony. It's an enormous amount of work that this commission has undertaken, and it's fascinating that that we're trying to get communities of interest from all over the state and training normal citizens in how to do this. So that's very, very exciting. So thank you once again, and thank you for your service on the People's Maps Commission.
Sure, thanks for having us.
So the commission is hard at work to create an alternative to partisan maps, but under the Wisconsin Constitution, only the legislature has the authority to approve those maps. Will that happen? It seems highly unlikely. We have every reason to expect that the legislature will create another set of gerrymandered maps as they did a decade ago. But there may be a more permanent solution. And can we go to the next slide, please? As you can see on this map, a few states have created a nonpartisan commission to draw maps. I'd now like to introduce Dave Hansen from Green Bay, who served in the Wisconsin Senate from District 30 for 20 years, beginning in 2001 until his retirement last January. Senator Hansen was a sponsor of legislation that would put a nonpartisan commission in charge of drawing district maps. This is sometimes called the Iowa model because it's based on what was done in Iowa 40 years ago. And in 40 years, Iowa has never had a court challenge to its district maps. Senator Hansen, can you talk about the legislation that you sponsored? What exactly would it do, and how is it different from the Iowa model?
Yeah, first of all, I've sponsored fair maps 2013, 2015, and 2017. We saw in 2011 the maps were drawn outside of the Capitol, state computers at a Republican law office, and we didn't find out about it at all. I didn't know if my district had changed to the point where I was drawn out or not, but I was given 30,000 new constituents, and the former Senator Frank Lassay said to me, "You can't win, because this is drawn to beat you." And that's what fair maps is all about. And you've got legislators that aren't accountable because they're in districts that are safe. Their mathematical formula is unbelievable. They put themselves in position. I think Penny talked about it. You get 54% of the vote, the Democrats, and yet you get 46, 45 seats out of 99. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But what we've tried to do with the governor, we did propose some changes in the Iowa model to try to make it a little safer. And unlike Iowa, we're on a third try to pass a map. The process is opened up to allow amendments. Governor Evers and our bill required a 3/4 majority to pass any amendments or bill on the third try. Basically, we didn't trust Robin Voss and Scott Fitzgerald and others, so we wanted to make a safeguard in place. If the legislature fails to pass a map, then the issue would most likely go to the courts. And that would work better. Basically, when we've had split legislatures, fair maps were usually ending up being drawn in the courts, which were a lot more fair than what happened in 2011 when they had total control. The executive branch and the legislative branch, and they drew lines that worked very well for them for 10 years. And that is the importance of fair maps going forward. If we allow them to do that again, we got another 10 years of basically getting screwed and letting them run the show where they can make decisions in the legislature. Even if the public likes it, they can go the other way because they're in districts that are safe. And although the maps will be drawn by attorneys in the nonpartisan LRB, Legislative Reference Bureau, we wanted to protect them from partisan influence. So while those assigned to redistricting remain employees of the LRB, they would be chosen and directed by the redistricting commission, could also terminate any attorney's work on the bill if necessary, if they felt that person wasn't treating his responsibility correctly. We also made it possible for the LRB to test each district to make sure they are as competitive as possible, to make sure the maps are truly fair. And finally, in the Iowa model, they were going to do 3 public hearings throughout the state. And we increased the number of public hearings from 3 to 8, with a hearing held in each of the state's 8 congressional districts, and then present all testimony from those hearings to the legislature. And as I understand right now, there hasn't been any bipartisan, well, there has been some bipartisan support. That was one of your questions. And in 2017, I think we got 5 Republican Assembly people to sign on. And one of them, Joe Kitchens, just said, well, I'm signing on to get people off my backs because I don't really support this. And he was heard saying that. So, you know, it sounds like we're finally getting to the point where you got bipartisan support. But I learned that if you can't get to the vote, people will take a safe vote and say, okay, we support this, when they really don't. And that's the battle we have to have. And I think what the governor's got to do, and it's in his budget, the fair maps or the People's Map Commission, he's got to make sure that there are fair maps in his budget, or he can't sign that budget. He's got to veto it. And he's got to veto that part of it. Because this is democracy. This is about one person, one vote. If we don't stand strong now, we're going to get 10 more years of them running the show. And right now, there have been no bills introduced because they're waiting on the governor and the People's Map Commission to make a determination, a decision. And our chances of getting this done, get back to what can the governor do? Can he prevent them from dictating and saying in this budget, well, we're not going to accept this? He's got to hold strong because this is our future. And it's our right as a legislature, when I was in it, to delegate the responsibility to LRB. And they'll say, well, there's no such thing as nonpartisan. Well, LRB is nonpartisan. They are hired to be non-political people, and they make decisions based on what's good. And you don't have these squiggly lines and all this other stuff that has happened. We did have an opportunity in 2009 to move forward with our own maps because we did have control of the legislature, but the Senate wanted to move forward and the Assembly did not. They didn't see this coming, that in 2011, it would be gerrymandered so bad that we'd be ripped off for 10 years. And there was a lot of things going on in 2009, you know, with the downfall in the economy and all this, but there were attempts to do something. Of course, it's been argued if the Democrats would have done it, it would have been pretty bad too, but it would have been a heck of a lot better than what the Republicans got to do in the future. And just to close a little bit, people deserve to have their votes count. And right now they don't. Here we have an opportunity to get a couple $2 billion in M&A expansion. All the public wants it. Republicans say no. They want at least medical marijuana. They say no. So all these opportunities to move bills forward, they just have the opportunity to say no, because back home, there's still 70% Republican back there. They're going to get voted in. Robin Voss is well protected. I mean, here we're looking at a state Senate now in a blue to red state where Joe Biden won, 21-12 Republican in the state Senate, and what, 36-63 in the Assembly? That's not indicative of Wisconsin. That's not us. But that is what the gerrymandering has done to this state. They just don't care about moving good legislation forward that the people really want. And then Governor Evers gets elected, and we hear from all these people, and they're saying to us, and Sheila worked on this too, don't pass this stuff that's going to take power away from the governor. Let's work together. And yet they did it. They took away power from the governor and the attorney general. And it was a sad day. But we deserve fair and competitive elections. We deserve a real two-party system and a government where their voice can be heard. And they deserve a government where neither party has the ability to lock in a majority for years and years. And they deserve a legislature that is responsible to their needs, not the needs of wealthy and corporate donors. And I think we're seeing it in DC, at least now, where people are making decisions in the legislature and the executive branch that really look out for all the people, not the top 1%. And in Wisconsin right now, it's all about power to the people. And I like to quote one, Lord Acton, former Lord, absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And that's what we're seeing. And it's so sad, but we got to continue the good fight and somehow got to get it done, because 10 more years of rotten redistricting is really going to screw us forever.
Yeah, you made
Thank you.
reference to the LRB, the Legislative Reference Bureau, and that would be like a nonpartisan commission, correct? That would draw the maps?
That is correct.
Okay.
And they are selected and they cannot take a political position. They're
Okay.
supposed to represent both sides equally. And that's what the LRB does. And that's why, you know, when they argue, well, there's no such thing as non-political or nonpartisan, that's just not true. They would be the arm in Iowa. They did it for 40 years and it didn't cost a lot of money. And in our state, they got sued, and they had to pay $1.5 million, and they had to pay for lawyers and all this other stuff. If we just look out for the will of the people, we'd be moving us forward. And that's why in 2011, they got away with bloody murder. And it's really made it really tough to represent people in the legislature, because we've had good ideas and good thoughts. We used to get along in 2011. Both sides would work together. But after that, it's all changed.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this Legislative Reference Bureau would have the authority to draw the maps, but under the Wisconsin Constitution, only the legislature can approve those maps, correct? So how is this not, a lot of people criticize this to say it's not constitutional.
The constitutionality allows the legislature to get a nonpartisan organization. At least that would be my argument, that it's constitutional to have a nonpartisan group draw fair maps. And I think that's what this is all about. And I think that's why it has to happen. I believe the secret, I think, and I've talked to Governor Evers about this, that he's going to have to hold strong somehow in this budget to say, we're not going to approve rotten maps. We want fair maps. And how many counties out of the 72 in this state, over 50 plus, and local communities have supported fair maps? They want fair maps because they know their future with good legislation to help them is at risk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, of course, the Wisconsin governor has an extraordinary veto power. He has that line item veto power, so he can veto any partisan maps that the legislature comes up with, correct?
That's correct. And that would be our hope. But there's some discussion in Madison now that maybe they won't even approve a budget. The governor did get a lot of federal money funding because of COVID, and they wanted to take control of that, but he vetoed that. And they also wanted to suppress the vote and take away people's right to even have that. And he vetoed that. So he has that ability. But if you don't pass the budget, and maybe Penny could respond to this, then you go with the old budget from the prior 2 years. And maybe that's the way to go around it, but he's got to figure out a way. And right now, as of today, we heard they wanted a bunch of money, like $200,000 next month, to hire lawyers to fight something that's not even out there yet. So they're really prepared to fight for something that's wrong for democracy and one person, one vote. It's all about protecting their power. And that is sad.
Well, thank you once again, Senator Hansen, and thank you for your long 20-year service to the Wisconsin Senate and to the people of Wisconsin. Could we go to the next slide, please? At this time, I'd like to once again thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us this evening. We do have a little over 30 minutes remaining for any questions that have been submitted through the Q&A. And I'd like to introduce Jackie Klimaszewski, who is our League's Voter Service Director, and she also represents the Appleton AAUW that is a co-sponsor of this event this evening. She's been monitoring the questions for us. Jackie, do you have any additional questions for our panelists?
There were some questions that Mr. Cricky has answered. So, but other people might like to hear about them. I think because of the film, we really tuned in to the people, the personalities. It made that real to us. And so there was some concerns about, okay, Jenny, we were pulling for her, but she lost, and how she would have coped had she won. Been in Madison, had to be the legislator, I mean, with her family and her challenges. So do either one of you want to respond to that, to the group?
Jim, should I jump in?
Um, Sure. I apologize for answering the questions.
That's okay.
So,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead.
I think one of the things that someone was pointing out is that legislators have staffs, but I think that's one of the things that we wanted to highlight was, you know, a lot of people are prevented from public service because it's hard if you're a mother, if you're a single mother, and to see somebody who's willing to go to that level of effort, even with multiple jobs and children as a single mother, shows, you know, a real level of dedication. There are just, so people know, there are some organizations, Jenny was not involved with any organization, but there are now some organizations that are focused on helping mothers who are running for office, or running for public office, to help them overcome those very specific challenges. But as Jim pointed out, Jenny had just people who are willing to, you know.
Yeah, she was ready to go. She had a strategy.
Also in Madison, a legislator does get a staff person that helps them with the office in Madison. It's a full-time position, and that person does do a lot of work in Madison. And it's a good way to support somebody who is a single mom or a single parent, or somebody who just, you have to have a staff person in Madison to make it work.
Yeah.
So Sheila Plotkin is the name of the teacher who used the open records to review the voting record versus citizen opinions. And I believe that is posted in her We the Irrelevant website, was posted in the responses as well. But the question comes up, how can we take Sheila's information and get it out there? I see a thread running through these comments and these questions about this is important, this is critical information. We know about this now, we know a little bit more than we did before. How do we get everybody else on board with learning about this? Anyone who wants to chime in with, because that's our challenge here.
I'm happy to say in the beginning, thank you for this. This is an opportunity. I've had several opportunities since the film came out. The website is available. I'm delighted to say that since it was published first in December of 2015, it's had over 300,000 unique visitors. That's a lot of people interested. I have a Facebook page. With Irrelevant has a Facebook page. I can reach sometimes several thousand people with a post, depends on how well I construct it. But it's been my goal to get this information out. One of the things that I suggest to people is, if you go to the website, you'll see in the primary navigation at the top something called a 4-up. It's a simple display of the data, summary of the data. And that's the kind of thing that you could take to a meeting you're going to. You want to talk to your neighbors, to your friends, to your group. Of course, we're not doing that much anymore, but you could still do it on Zoom. So there are ways to get the information out. That has been my goal. It's why I put the website up there in the first place, because I thought this was important. So the data is public. If you find numbers that apply to your district, and you would find them because I did all 33 Senate districts, all 99 assembly districts, there, it's all there. And so I would encourage people to go and print out what they want and take it with them to help people learn that this information is there.
Do you think it would be beneficial for us to mail these tables regarding legislators' voter contact information to our legislators, to the press?
Well, the press, perhaps. I mean, I've had some good press, but the legislators, they know it's there. They're the ones that I queried. But I wouldn't stop anybody from sending it anywhere. I mean, I think that it is important enough. And as one individual, I can't possibly reach the entire state. But I do have followers throughout the state, even in red districts. So it's been a labor of one. If we can turn it into a labor of many, that would be wonderful. And the film has really helped in that regard, because I've been out asked to talk to lots of more people than I could have reached before.
As Sheila said, I think it's important for us to get this information to the press, so it doesn't hurt to make a connection with one of the reporters in your local area, one of the TV reporters or one of the newspaper reporters, and give them Sheila's information. Give them the information about Representative Murphy not responding and Senator not responding. We do need to let the news media know this. The other thing is you should be trying to build a connection or a kind of a understanding with your legislator, even if they disagree with you, that you will continue to call them and you will continue to talk to them. And if they don't respond to you, you'll call them out on it and let them know that you're going to do that. It's very important that we keep trying to make a connection to our legislators and that we ask them to have listening sessions. We ask them to have office hours, sign up for their newsletters online. Most every representative has a website and a newsletter. Sign up and get that. And if you don't see what you want to see in it, call them out on it and make it public.
Any other comments around that before I move to the next question?
Well, I'd like to interject one question for Sheila. So if our legislators are not listening to their constituents, who are they listening to? Just their donors?
I'm afraid that's true. I did do a little bit of research into lobbying during this period of time in early 2015 that I was focused on when I began. And the chart was stunning, because the money that came in lobbying for these various changes, for the increase in dark money in our campaigns, for the dissolution of the Government Accountability Board, and there were other things, but those two primarily. The graph, the money was up here.
Which houses?
The lobbying on the money coming from organizations opposed to that was this much.
No.
But the contacts that I recorded, what the people wanted was up here. So it's clear to me that who they're listening to are the people with the deep pockets who make their campaigns possible and keep them where they are, or at least help them to stay where they are. I wish that were not true, but I believe that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, when you were collecting your information, there was the open records law. So is there some kind of requirement or law that the legislators need to keep track?
No, They
Okay.
actually exempted themselves from the requirement to keep emails. They're free to get rid of them. My experience has been that they tend to keep the emails, the correspondence that come from their voters. So that's who they consider their constituents. And those are the ones they keep. But I've had numerous times when a legislator has told me, no, zero, I got nothing. But when others send me the emails they've gotten, that legislator's name is in the to box. So I know they got it, they trashed it. I counted them in anyway, because I wasn't going to let them get away with that. I think that's a loophole in the law that I would like to see changed. I don't, and I think that Senator Larson from Milwaukee has tried repeatedly to introduce a bill that would force them to keep that correspondence. That is, after all, a public record. I don't think he's been successful, but maybe I hope he'll keep trying. The other issue you may have noticed on the Fox Valley districts, that Representative Steineke wanted me to pay him over $100 for his records. I didn't pay him. And that's another issue that has never been to the courts. I've thought about it occasionally. But I believe that there's a difference in open records, and then I'll stop, between a citizen acting in the public interest and a media outlet or a law firm with a budget for this sort of thing, in terms of charging fees for public records.
So for your data, you did not pay for any records?
Only when I was disabled temporarily and I needed to have them mailed to me.
Oh.
And that was hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but my grandchildren said, you need a Kickstarter. So I did 2 of them, and that money paid for that, because it was many hundreds of dollars.
Sheila, have you done a similar analysis of budget hearing comments? So at yesterday's virtual hearing, nearly every speaker spoke in favor of Governor Evers' budget proposal.
Right, I did that in 2019 because it focused on public education. That's my history, my profession. And I asked for all of the correspondence of people who put public education as a priority, who wanted that to be a priority in the budget. And it was overwhelming. It's one of my statistics that I have. It was overwhelming, the people who wanted public education to be a high priority. But the committee made significant cuts to the governor's budget for public education.
Could Senator Hansen comment on the problems of the unemployment compensation this year? The legislature refused to fix the system 4 years ago. Is this a gerrymandering issue?
It's still an issue. We heard a real lot about this. The system was not set up to handle the immense numbers that happened after the pandemic. I mean, the unemployment numbers were just incredible. The computer system was outdated. You couldn't run it 24/7, though Nygren and Republicans would say you got to run it all the time, but it would have blown up. And then you had a fall guy. The head of it was removed, and a good friend of mine that we work with. But it's a sad situation because people really needed the unemployment comp. And this goes back where they didn't answer the phones going backwards, even a few years ago when there were numbers. But these numbers were incredible. You couldn't handle with the system in place. You didn't have the numbers. And then when it happened, oh yeah, it's Democrats' fault because you're in power. But in reality, they hadn't done what was necessary to upgrade the system to be ready for what happened. Of course, who would have thought you'd have that kind of unemployment, 10, 11, 12% out of nowhere, and to try to handle that. So we dealt with a lot of calls, and some of the calls are answered. We were able to help some people, but not everybody. And hopefully it's gotten better now. I think our numbers in our state are better. But I wanted to comment on Sheila's work. I think it's really, really good what you're doing. The problem is the people that have so much money in these campaigns, they lie a lot. They don't tell the truth. I mean, they go out there and you're going to defund the police. You're going to do this. You're for rioting and all this crap, and it works, even if they lie. So, it's good enough to get the facts out there, but sometimes it's just like, you're really beating your head against the wall, especially in districts. We had some great Senate candidates, awesome candidates, assembly candidates that should have won. But in these gerrymandered districts, they couldn't. They competed well with money sometimes, but when you're getting hit and sometimes with not factual information, it becomes difficult. And there was a doctor running in an assembly district, great candidate, great opportunity for a doctor to be in Madison during the pandemic. And she lost by a little bit because that district was so badly gerrymandered, but she deserved to win. And a lot of other people deserve to win. And I give them credit for trying, because politics isn't always easy. You're getting slammed a lot and you got to do what you can do. But it's too bad that some of the really good people, they're running for Senate, they should have won, and now it's 21-12. And I think people knew about their records, these Republicans, but it's got R by their name. It's okay. That's a political statement.
Can you expand on how that gerrymandering and what the behind the issues of Medicaid expansion funds and why that hasn't happened for the state of Wisconsin?
Well, we could probably have captured about $2 billion by now to insure a lot more people. But MA expansion, if you took it to the public, they say yes. But the Republicans got it in their head that somehow that has something to do with President Obama and the Affordable Care Act, and they've been against it just on pure political principle, their principles, not for the good of the people. And that's what gerrymandered has done. They should have supported this. And I really thought Governor Walker was running for president. And when he came back, running back for governor against Tony, he should have taken the money. Probably would have helped them win. That's our money we're giving to other states and their health care. So all these other states are benefiting with our money that we should have. We always complain about the feds not giving Wisconsin enough money. Well, here's our opportunity. We could have done it with rail. We definitely could have done it with MA, and we could have helped a lot more people. But they're in a position now with leadership. And it's sadly, too, you've got leadership like in the Senate, the Assembly, even if you've got people in your group, Republicans that would support it, it just doesn't happen. And then if you do bring it to the floor, they'll table it and say it's just, it's not really, it's just process. And so that's what you're fighting against. It's not an easy chore. And like I said, the last 10 years have been really difficult. Trying to get good per 2%. Dark stores is a good argument. The corporations were claiming that they should be taxed if, like compared to an empty store. And it's an issue that we could have done and we could have passed it, but they wouldn't even come into a vote. We had enough people in the Senate to pass it. Empty store rather than a store that's flourishing, and thus they pay less taxes. That's what the whole dark store loophole did. We should have had that done, but they didn't let it be done because their people that rule them with their money would not let it happen.
We'll move to a slightly different topic. How is the community of interest mapping going so far, and are the targets being met?
I'll take that one, Jacqueline. Yeah, no, it's building. As of last night, there were somewhere between 50 and 80 maps that have been submitted. It's clearly building. I mean, so again, the goal is 1,000 by June. There's more train-the-trainer events twice a week. So there's a ton of effort on it from Tufts University. That's all I can say about that, Jacqueline.
Can I ask a question about that also? Tony, could you give an example of a community of interest?
Yeah, I mean, waterways, school districts are several. People have submitted COI maps of their municipality, trying to keep that intact. So those are just several. But, ethnicities, we're trying to reach out to the Hmong population and see if they're have an interest, sort of like that, Linda.
Thanks.
How else will the film be shared here and elsewhere in Wisconsin for more people to view it?
Jim, you want to take this?
Yeah, sorry. The film is available on Amazon, Amazon Prime, and actually, no, just Amazon, sorry, and Vimeo, as well as if you are an educator, we have an education distribution through Bullfrog Films.
And we're doing more screenings like this. And certainly, you know, if anybody has other organizations or groups they think would benefit from it, we really want to show it to people and have conversations like this, particularly amongst groups that are not as deep in the issues. Because I think there are a lot of people who are, you know, still trying to understand, you know, what has happened over the past decade. So, and we're also sharing it outside of the state. There are a lot of states for which Wisconsin is an example of what could go wrong if, you know, it's really a heads up for a lot of people. So we're sharing it, you know, elsewhere as well.
So Tony, is it too late to submit a community of interest request?
Oh, not at all. I mean, as I said, it's going until at least June 1st, and that's not a hard stop. It may go through June. So no, definitely not. I mean, the intent is geared up here as we get into May, absolutely. So no, it's not too late.
And how would someone do that, or how would an entity do
Well,
that?
I mean, the website has a way of submitting maps, but if you don't know how to do it, you need to be trained. I can put that back in the chat. It was in my slides. It's also on the website in terms of train the trainer events, but if people have any interest, they can email me at the People's Maps, or I'm sure Penny, and I'm also got a personal email through local fair maps. So we can definitely get you trained very quickly if you have interest.
I'm sensing a concern running through the comments here about the process. We kind of know how it's supposed to run, but we're anticipating a lot of bumps. Mr. Hansen had talked about it being connected with the budget. Is that how it's going to come forward, as part of the budget, or is it going to come through as separate legislation from the People's Maps and separate legislation from legislators? There's a lot of concern that this isn't going to just be smooth.
Well, I'll start, and then perhaps Mr. Hansen, I mean,
I would just say it probably won't be smooth, but right now there is no legislation out there. We are waiting on the People's Map Commission to come forward with a proposal, and they're going to every district. And I think that's going to be there. One way or the other, governor is going to try to get it in. Right currently, I think the People's Map Commission is in the budget, but the results of it aren't there yet. But I don't see any legislation. Back in 2013, we brought it up. We never got a public hearing. And the public really wants to have fair maps. They've proven it after referendum, but they just can't get it done because the Republicans love the system that's in place. And that's what we're fighting against. So one or the other, I don't think legislation happens, but maybe it's going to take a Supreme Court change in 22 to get it done. But I think the Map Commission and their results work. Not a simple solution, though.
right. I would agree. I don't think it's going to be smooth at all. I mean, I think we're going to submit our maps to the legislature. They can definitely choose to ignore them. They'll submit their maps to the governor, who is likely to veto them. And then it will go to the courts. Our goal as the People's Map Commission is to have wonderful maps and a process that we can show everybody, including the courts, and then maybe they'll look favorably on that. And so, you know, that's our optimistic hope, is that the end result will be maps that are less gerrymandered, probably through the court system. Maybe it will be the People's Maps. As far as the legislative process, I agree with Senator Hansen that, you know, that's probably not going to happen this year. It's probably going to take a cycle or two of elections to get more moderates in and more even government. And then there's a hope at that point that it can become a more permanent thing.
Is our best way forward to continuing on, and keeping the word out constantly, being nudges? Or are we to look for HR1 and S1 from the federal government? Would it be better to spend our energies there?
Well, for the record, the Supreme Court had the chance to fix this whole thing nationally, and they didn't do it. With that legislation in Congress now with voter suppression and fair maps, I think that's the key. We've got the Senate, if we get that 50-50 and the vice president making the determination, if we get done at the federal level, then it fixes it. And the state can't disagree with federal law. They can try to, but I think that may be the step forward. HR1, I believe it is, and that's a real possibility. You know, get rid of the voter suppression and put in for fair maps. I think that may be the best way to go. And if we can push Sinema and Manchin to agree that the filibuster has to be gone, this may be the best way to move forward in the future. Continue to push for fair maps because that is our future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we can have hope for national, but as the commission, we're not really looking at that for the solution. We're looking to give our fair maps to the legislature and the state, see what they do with them, and then see what the courts do with them. But the national, that would be great.
Do you think the new maps will be in place for 2022?
Yeah, I think even with the census delay, there's plenty of time to get it done. I don't see any, and we can see what other people think, but I don't think that's gonna not allow new maps to be drawn prior to the election cycle in 2022.
Do you think, in your opinion, will a map produced by the PAC have a better chance to be relied on by a federal court rather than maps put out by the Democrats or the Republican legislators?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. We're hoping so. I mean, by being transparent, very public, just the degree of work that's going into it, the absolute nonpartisan criteria, we're hoping it's looked upon favorably, but you know, you need to be able to look into the future to answer that question. And I have no idea. I think, you know, I guess my personal opinion, it's going to be something relatively close. I really think so. I think it'll be something relatively close to what we draw. You know, I think they could go back to the maps that were, and maybe Senator Hansen could comment on what the maps looked like in 2010. I mean, if we go back to that, that would be more reasonable than what we have right now.
I think that is the gist of the questions.
Yeah, I would say the maps in 2010 would have been much more preferable. The end of 1980, the courts decided because we had a split legislature. And so the opportunity to do what they did in 2011 was where they had total control, executive branch, legislative branch, and they could pretty much do what they want. Now we have the governor, he can veto whatever they're going to bring forward. He can bring your fair maps together. Maybe again, the courts will make the decision. Maybe that's the best way to go forward. That's why you got to keep pushing it though. And these referendums are very indicative, and it's sad. People support the referendums and they vote for candidates that are against them. The referendum questions. Makes no sense.
Well, Jackie, is that about wrap up most of the questions?
Yes,
do you think?
I would just remind people that in Sheila Plotkin's We the Irrelevant is in the Q&A. So that has been posted, as well as the People's Map information.
Great, great. Okay, could we go to the last slide, please? So I want to once again thank all of our panelists and our wonderful tech team, Dave Strange and Barb Kelly, who so ably manage all of our league's virtual events. And finally, thanks to everyone who took time to view this webinar. In my mind, there is nothing more important than finding a solution to partisan gerrymandering because it stands in the way of progress on every other important issue. During the past decade, there has been an extraordinary grassroots campaign to demand fair maps in Wisconsin. 56 of Wisconsin's 72 counties, representing nearly 80% of Wisconsinites, have taken a stand in favor of fair maps. If you would like to be part of this grassroots effort, join with the League of Women Voters and become part of the Fair Maps Coalition in Wisconsin. Thank you again for joining us, and good night.